Hello and welcome to episode number 39 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney, and as per usual, we've got a ton to talk about today. Before we get into it here, please make sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news about future guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. Please rate the show if you enjoy listening. It means more to me than I could put into words. And every time you either like the show on SoundCloud, give it a rating on iTunes, follow it on Spotify, etc. A puppy gets a hug from its owner. I don't make the rules here, just making sure you are in the know. If you prefer listening to podcasts on YouTube, search Chel Squared Podcast, and the show is there too. This episode is dedicated to the Winnipeg Jets, a team whose most recent game featured an incredible Sharks win with about 3.5 seconds to go in regulation. The Jets have dropped their last 2 games and are 4-6 in their last 10. They're 3-4 since the trade deadline, a day in which GM Kevin Cheveldayoff was incredibly active, making numerous trades to try to push the team to Stanley Cup contention this season. The Jets made 6 trades on deadline day in total, most notably trading a 2019 first-round pick, a 2022 fourth-rounder, and Brandon Lemieux to the Rangers for Kevin Hayes, who has 5 points in 7 games as a Jet. Winnipeg also picked up Nathan Beaulieu from the Sabres for a 2019 sixth-round pick, and he's got 3 assists in 7 games as a Jet. How have both of these players looked so far? We'll get into that. Despite seemingly getting better on paper, though, the Jets haven't been able to get the wheels turning. Is there a particular aspect that stands out which would explain the struggles on the ice? We'll talk about it. Jets defenseman Dustin Byfuglien still on IR, no timetable for return, and Josh Morrissey still out with an upper body injury too. He hasn't played since February 24th when he got hit by Coyotes forward Vinny Hinostroza. He reportedly isn't expected to return until April. This very much coincides with the recent inconsistency of the team. Are the two connected? Maybe. Despite recent play, Winnipeg is still on top of the Central Division with 84 points, 1 ahead of the Nashville Predators, and the Jets have 2 games in hand. If the playoffs started today, the Jets would play the Dallas Stars in round 1. Is that the best matchup for Winnipeg, or would they want to play someone else in the opening round? Also, what exactly are the playoff expectations in Winnipeg? This team is built for playoff success, but what's the benchmark for success, and what would be considered failure? Is it cup or bust? We'll get into that as well. The Jets have a lot of contract decisions very soon. A big chunk of the team has expiring contracts at the end of the season, including new acquisition Kevin Hayes. Other big names include RFA Jacob Trouba, UFA Tyler Myers, and of course RFA Patrick Laine, who's getting paid and who's potentially packing bags. And how set is this team exactly moving forward? How good is the pipeline for the Winnipeg Jets? We'll get into all of that, the poll question, and a whole lot more. Joining me today is Jets reporter for The Athletic, Murat Atesh. Murat, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
Hey, doing quite well. Real happy to be here. That was a tremendous introduction. I think you nailed all the key points.
I appreciate you saying that. Before we get into it here, super duper important question for you. In your Twitter bio, you have, quote, treating people like people at the end of it. This phrase clearly important enough to you to include in your bio. So what exactly does it mean to you, and what kind of prompted you to put it on there? I
think for me, it just reflects one of my most underlying values, and that's just appreciation of sort of the opportunity that I have to, in this case, to write for a really engaged and interesting audience, to appreciate the opportunity that I have to write about a content or about content that I really sincerely enjoy, and to really respect the idea that all the players, all the coaches I talk to, for whatever the analysis says one way or another about them, they're human beings with lives, and just holding that amount of respect very highly. My brand isn't about hot takes. It's about analysis as much as possible, about storytelling as well. And I just want that to be first and foremost in terms of how I treat the folks within the organization, but also folks on Twitter as well. I've had so many valuable conversations over the years on Twitter, on message boards, all sorts of things. And that sort of respect level that, that gets shown when you disagree with arguments as opposed to people, has just led to everything good. And I just want that to be something that shines forward. That's a real interesting pull on your part. I have literally never been asked that question.
Well, that's a terrific response. I mean, I read your bio and I was like, this is something that I don't see often in bios, especially in professional settings, because usually the professional setting bio is, just what the person is involved in, where they work, what they do. But to see that in a bio, especially coming from someone that does what you do, it's unique. And I thought I figured I'd ask because I've never really seen that before.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Winnipeg Jets, the team that you cover day in and day out, like I said in the opening, they've been pretty inconsistent since the trade deadline. Kevin Hayes, though, 5 points in 7 games. Nathan Beaulieu has 3 assists in the 7 games as the Winnipeg Jet. What have you seen out of these two guys? What have they brought to the table, and how have they looked on the ice so far?
Well, first impressions were exactly as advertised, particularly for Kevin Hayes. He is a big man with soft hands, and even in the very first practice I took him in, it was easy to see that he was hitting tape across large stretches of ice very easily. He's a playmaker in a big body that uses his size to gain space, but his vision is really the strength of his game. Every now and again, you kind of hope that he would shoot, and then he makes a play differently as well. And that's been one of his strengths. And even strength is his playmaking. And on the power play, he's on the Jets' second unit right now, which tends to create a lot of shooting opportunities. Doesn't take them quite as much, so he fits in perfectly there right now. It's my hope and hunch that we'll eventually see him on the top unit, where his pass first philosophy would look great in what's currently Kyle Connor's spot. Though Connor has been scoring a lot as recently as well. And then Nathan Beaulieu, was really curious about that acquisition. Him and Bohdan Kiselevich as well. You know that Winnipeg's in a bit of a difficult position with Dustin Byfuglien out, Josh Morrissey out, and even with them in the roster, there's a bit of a hole in that top 4 left defenseman spot. Ben Sherratt's been a gamer; he's played alongside Dustin Byfuglien for most of the year. But there was room for upgrading there, and missing out a little bit on Jake Muzzin to Toronto seemed to hurt. And then when Josh Morrissey got injured the night before the trade deadline, it really upped the importance of those acquisitions. And neither one of Beaulieu or Kiselevich came in to be the savior, but there are some interesting things to like about each one. Beaulieu has played a ton alongside Jacob Trouba. The fact that they're positive in goals and just above 50% in possession is a real testament to how hard those guys have worked. They do sometimes look exposed in some communication situations where Josh Morrissey and Jacob Trouba might not, and there's a particular line change against Tampa Bay that they got split very easily down the middle, and then the other night with that tremendous comeback win by San Jose, there were some positional issues as well. But overall, it's been good. You can see why the Jets gambled on him as an option to come in and stick on the roster as well when Josh Morrissey gets healthy. I like what I've seen from him in terms of his physicality. He's broken out of the zone reasonably well as well, which was a question mark and a good thing for Winnipeg right now. If they keep him on the roster when everybody's healthy, I think he would definitely have earned it.
So the Jets, like I said, are 3-4 in the last 7 games since the deadline. Is the blue line the biggest reason for their inconsistency recently? Is there maybe something else that perhaps people that don't live in Winnipeg or aren't Jets fans intrinsically know about this team? Because seemingly they did get better with the addition of Kevin Hayes and Nathan Beaulieu, but like we said earlier, Byfuglien's out, Morrissey's out. Is that reason number one why they haven't seemingly gotten those wheels turning as quickly as they would like them to be? Or is there some underlying reason, perhaps some analytics, some other numbers that suggest, hey, this is a team that looks good, but perhaps there are more issues than there were addressed?
I think that's a great question, and the answer from my point of view would have at least a few layers to it. The single biggest roster change in the offseason, other than not re-signing Paul Stastny, which I think a lot of us sort of saw as a really nice fit in Winnipeg, But Winnipeg last season was a dominant team at 5-on-5 in all situations before the arrival of Stanley. So if you exclude him, the single biggest change in their personnel was the exit of Toby Enstrom to Europe and the promotion of Ben Chiarot from sort of the bottom pairing or even off the roster at times last season to a top 4 role alongside Dustin Byfuglien. And that's 3 minutes or so extra per game on Chiarot's part. Like I say, he's a gamer for sure. There's lots of things to like about his game. But in terms of the puck movement and the effortlessness with which Byfuglien and Enstrom move the puck out of the zone, you would expect even heading into the season that Winnipeg would give up a little bit more in terms of quality scoring chances just from an analytics perspective at 5-on-5. And that definitely happened. Chiarot's been good, and I would say he's impressed me for sure. But it's been easier to generate quality scoring chances, expected goals, whatever your metric is. Winnipeg's defense has overall been worse this season, even before those key injuries. So a lot of folks would have expected the Jets to dominate, be sort of a top 5 even strength team right out of the gate. And they won a lot of games, but a lot of that had to do with power play, special teams, goaltending stole some games as well. So they were winning in different ways. They were slightly above average or average at 5-on-5 right up until that Byfuglien injury. And then when these injuries started to hit, now you're starting to see a team that's getting outplayed at 5-on-5, that's below 50% in expected goals, below 50% in Corsi, and things to that extent. So the injuries have absolutely played a role. The personnel heading into the season, I would say, played a role as well. And then most recently what we see, kind of looking for signs of positivity. Something missing from the Jets' play for much of the season was the quality forecheck, the hard back pressure, forwards coming back. And we dissected this in great detail at The Athletic last week. But team defense, even outside of Winnipeg's zone, from forwards coming back, there's a few wrinkles that were simply missing from the Jets game that they've begun to identify recently. And as the forwards get progressively better and Hayes helps there, Ehlers' return from injury helps there too, what they found is that while they're getting better in transition, but the Jets' injury situation on D makes their own zone pretty chaotic, even when everybody's doing the best that they can. So the hope in Winnipeg then would be when Josh Morrissey returns, when Dustin Byfuglien returns, they're excellent players. They help Winnipeg spend more time outside of their own zone and definitely inside of Winnipeg's own end. They're 2 of the very best, 2 of the top 3 for sure. So the hope is that the forwards sort of repurposed, recommitment to two-way play all over the ice. And I am seeing that. I do believe that there's been an improvement there. But hopefully you can pair that to a Jets in-zone play that reflects the quality of Morrissey and Byfuglien. And if all of these things happen, then the Jets may be very good just in time for the playoffs. But I would say as far as the juggernaut expectations we had for them go, they've missed that. And it's about finding that just in time for the stretch run and for the playoff drive.
There's been stretches of this season where Patrik Laine hasn't been able to find that dynamic scoring that the NHL has expected from him in his past couple of seasons where he's lit up the league game in and game out. Is there a particular thing that you can kind of pinpoint as to why that is? Maybe he's gripping the stick a little too tightly. Maybe he's missing the net a little more often than he used to. Is there one particular reason where although Patrik Laine is still 29 goals this season, 46 points, which would be great for most players, but that might be a little low for Laine and what he expects from himself and what Jets fans at this point expect from Patrik Laine. So is there one particular reason where the slumps have kind of gotten to him a little bit, or is there something else going on, do you think?
I just think that he's one of the most exceptional players that we've seen in the NHL in terms of how hot his hot streaks are and how cold his cold ones are. I mean, after scoring 16 goals in November, there was a lot of talk that, hey, we could see a Rocket Richard trophy in Winnipeg. And now to look at the goal total standings, he's well outside the top 10. And that was a long and prolonged slump that he went through. On the power play, he was getting the same rate or almost the same rate of opportunities. He was shooting almost as often. So I would go ahead and I'm willing to believe that percentages and a little bit of bad fortune had something to do there. At even strength, before he joined the top line with Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler, he wasn't getting as many chances, as many looks. It seems when he's paired with Brian Little, the two of them succeed in other situations, but not necessarily together, and they stayed together for a long stretch. So that might have had something to do with it as well. He's not a player that dominates in both ends of the ice yet, but he does that important thing, which is firing the puck like almost nobody else can do it. So the trick really with him has been to get him in situations where he's in that offensive zone all the more. And Scheifele and Wheeler are a good combination of players to do that with. And then similarly, Laine's commitment to his two-way game, I think, would be underrated around the league right now, just in terms of how hard he back checks. He's often the first forward back, which is remarkable given who his line mates are right now. And if you want to take all the analysis right out of it and just go for some good vibes, it took him maybe a week with Nick Ehlers back in the lineup to score as many goals as he had the entire several weeks that Ehlers was out. It's almost marches hand in hand, Laine's goal scoring with Nick Ehlers' presence. And I know they're good buddies. There's lots of fun interviews and videos. You can see clips of them laughing together on the ice. And it's just a silly coincidence in my mind. But as soon as Nick Ehlers returned, they don't play on the same line. They don't play on the same power play unit. But Patrick Laine immediately started scoring, and it's been kind of an interesting one to watch because, I don't think I know the answer to this question, but it's just such a great story when he's scoring and such a terrific slump when he's not too. So what an interesting guy Patrick Laine is.
Yeah, it's always funny how those coincidences always seem to work at just the right place at the right time. Blake Wheeler, by the way, he's 32 years old, but it almost seems like he's 24. It seems like he will never ever stop producing at the level that he has been his entire career. And honestly, I call him probably the most underrated player in the history in the league right now, because this man has been putting up ridiculous numbers his entire career, and yet he is not being talked about often enough, at least outside the Winnipeg media sphere. And year in and year out, I mean, this guy's got 84 points in 69 games this season, leads the Winnipeg Jets as he has done, and yet the discussion of one of the best players or one of the best wingers, he's usually either not in that conversation or is an afterthought, and that kind of really bothers me because Blake Wheeler, I mean, I've loved Blake Wheeler and the way he plays the game for a long time, and the fact that the hockey media, as far as I know, I mean, I could be totally wrong, but from what I know, there isn't as much attention on Blake Wheeler as there should be. And do you think there's a specific reason why? Maybe it's because he's in Winnipeg, but he's not in an original six franchise, or is there another reason as to why people just don't seem to understand how fantastic Blake Wheeler is on the ice?
That's a brilliant question. I think that, he has driven play and controlled play at even strength for so long now that I think that underrated title that you gave him absolutely makes sense. For several years, almost ever since he got to Winnipeg, and then even before that as well, he's a player that you can count on to drive possession and offensive results at 5-on-5. Something that's happened in the last 2 years, just as his 5-on-5 play has maybe dropped from absolutely elite to very good first line, or at least first line capable for sure, is that he's started to quarterback this number one power play that is kind of a cheat code oftentimes, fourth ranked in the NHL right now. At times it's been number one in the league. And if you look at Wheeler's production just over his career, you see that his even strength production has stayed almost consistent over the last several years, but in the last two, his power play points have just exploded. And when he's able to find Mark Scheifele in the slot, Patrick Laine across the ice, when Byfuglien's healthy at the top, it's a murderer's row of right-handed shots, and the right-hand shot means they're all open for their one-timers as well. He's been able to make the passes necessary over and over again with a consistency that's lifting him up into some new point total thresholds. Over the last 4 years, he's had the most assists in the NHL as well. So to ask, why doesn't he get that league-wide recognition? Maybe it's because those spectacular power play numbers hadn't happened before. I would say Winnipeg's status as a small market definitely influences that as well. I believe that for sure. I mean, you could look at other small markets at an Alex Barkov in Florida or a Jack Eichel in Buffalo and think that these guys could get more attention as well. And then now we're finally starting to see it, and we're starting to see some playoff success as well. I mean, they went all the way to the conference finals last year, and oftentimes in the NHL, reputations follow, rightly or wrongly, playoff success. And, I think should they have a prolific run this spring, you're going to start to see an awful lot of Blake Wheeler feature stories written around the NHL.
That would be great, because so far I haven't been seeing enough of them, and I've constantly been a proponent of more Blake Wheeler content. We need more Wheeler content on the internet. One more play that I want to mention here really quickly is Matthieu Perreault. I have a couple of questions for you in regards to Matthieu Perreault. One, is he ever going to get a haircut? Because that is some extreme hair. And two, it does seem like his production has decreased this season from last year. He had 39 points last year and 26 this season. He played 70 games last year, 69 this season. He's 31. He is signed until 2021 with a cap hit of $4.125 million, thanks to Cap Friendly for that information. Is that still a viable contract for Winnipeg to hold on to Matthieu Perreault? Is there perhaps an idea that he might not be on Winnipeg any longer? I mean, there's no rumor or anything like this. This is just a curiosity out of for my sake. But is Perreault staying in Winnipeg long term, even though his production seemingly has decreased, or is there perhaps a change in that department sometime soon?
Yeah, Perreault's one of those very, very interesting players. First off, I think that if he cuts his hair, there would be a ton of disappointed Winnipeg Jets fans. I see a lot of love for that mane, probably even more so than Sami Niiku's flow. In terms of the hair appreciation that I see in my travels around the internet. But in terms of who he is as a player, even last season, it was really tremendously unique. He missed some games early on and then came back on that fourth line with Matt Hendricks and Joel Armia and was just on fire to start the year, went through a tremendous cold streak at the end of the year. It was a tale of two different players strictly in terms of results. But process-wise, if you like your analytics, he's a guy that's still at the stage of his career. His teammates' 5-on-5 numbers improve when he's on the ice with them, and decrease when he's not there as well. So he still has quite a lot to give in terms of controlling where on the ice the game gets played. You can see that most notably on the forecheck. He's quite a water bug out there. He gets his stick into lanes. He knocks down pucks. He makes really good reads on defenders who are looking to break out. He doesn't hit to run people over, but when he does hit, he's in the battle and he separates people from the puck. So you can watch people's possession stats get better when Perreault's on the ice. But like you say, that production's falling away as well, and a lot of folks are going to have questions about that. To me, he's a player that is, because of that salary that you mentioned, perhaps on the trimming around the edges block as Winnipeg's roster gets more and more and more expensive. But he's still giving probably more value than I think his points would reflect. So I think that there's maybe a lower hanging fruit if you're the Winnipeg Jets looking to save the salary cap. Like, who was the question?
Yeah.
So Winnipeg's third pairing for most of the season was Dmitry Kulikov and Tyler Myers, who combined to make in the $10 million range between them, and who have struggled when elevated to almost a first pairing sort of usage in recent times with all of the injuries. So I think that that's a situation that's going to need to resolve itself before those sort of, not perfect contracts like the Perreaults and Littles of the world get addressed. Kulikov at above $4 million is getting outplayed by Beaulieu and Sherratt and others on the left side. I think Sami Niku is going to eclipse him right away as well. And then Tyler Myers is part of what makes a healthy Winnipeg Jets D on the right side kind of overpowered. When he plays on the third unit behind Byfuglien and behind Jacob Trouba, well, here's a guy who can do that job at even strength. Then he helps on the second power play unit, and he kills penalties as well. It's a luxury for Winnipeg, and he's quite good in that situation. And then you start to bump him further and further up the importance ladder, and you see that some of his reads in the defensive zone expose him a little bit, and it leads to a lot of chaos at both ends of the rink. So there are situations with his respective free agency, or if Winnipeg can do something to get out of Kulikov's contract, I think that saves quite a lot of money for the Jets salary cap situation. And then you can get to those secondary layers of contracts like the Perreaults. And similarly, Little, I would make arguments in his favor as well, though in both of those guys' cases, they're going to age out of their effectiveness while probably they're still getting paid. I think that's fair to say.
So let's talk about the cap issue for the Winnipeg Jets. It seems like a majority of their team needs a new contract at the end of this season. As I said in the opening, Kevin Hayes needs a new deal. Laine needs a new deal. Connor needs a new deal. There's a lot of big names on this team that need more money. I would assume that they need more money. Tyler Myers, of course, I would assume with Myers, he's making $5.5 million this year. There's going to be a UFA. I would assume that he is not going to make that much next season. But if a team in free agency were to give him that kind of salary, I would assume that he would go to that team and not stay in Winnipeg, even if they give him a slightly smaller contract. But I totally agree with what you said about Myers earlier. If someone does overpay him, that probably won't be good for whoever's blue line, because if you're giving a defenseman that kind of money, it assumes that they're going to play top 4 minutes. And Tyler Myers, like you said, and I absolutely agree, isn't the best option to play in the top 4 role. So there's a lot of people that need new contracts, which begs the question. Also, they don't have their first round pick this year, which was traded to the Rangers. They don't have their third round pick this year. Their sixth and their seventh round pick, they don't have either. And it's basically an all-in year for Winnipeg, if only looking at their draft picks and the contract situation. So a couple of questions stemming from this. One, is this a cup or bust season for the Jets? And also, what exactly is the plan for all of these contracts? I would assume that Chel has a plan, considering he is the general manager of a National Hockey League team, and they tend to have plans unless you are the former general manager of the Edmonton Oilers, a name that I have mentioned so many times on this podcast, he who must not be named for this week. I would assume Kevin Cheveldayoff has a plan, but what do you think that plan is?
Yeah, I think that what Cheveldayoff has done particularly well in the last 2 seasons is kind of read the room and recognize where his team is at in the standings, as well as with the impending cap crunch. So last season and this season, he traded major pieces, young players, first-round picks, to get players like Stanley, and this year Hayes, Beaulieu, etc. down the line. And I think that what that speaks to is a realization that this exact same Winnipeg Jets club, as soon as Kyle Connor gets paid, as soon as Patrick Laine gets paid, as soon as Blake Wheeler's contract extension kicks in, all of these to come this summer, well, the exact same team becomes so much more expensive. And all of a sudden, instead of having value contracts and ELCs spread out throughout the roster, Winnipeg's in a cap crunch. And we'll have to make some very difficult decisions about who to keep and who to let go or find ways out of their money. And that's a strength, I would say, one that he acted on both last season and this. And I think that does make it, if not a cup or bust year, have tremendous amount of playoff success or bust year for the Winnipeg Jets. And I think that it's very meaningful for its young stars who are going to be tomorrow, whether it's Laine, Ehlers, Connor, Scheifele, Morrissey, etc., throughout the line, that they continue to have meaningful playoff experience. I don't see them as a juggernaut entering these playoffs, so that cup talk, I don't know if that's realistic, but heading into the playoffs, going deep, winning rounds, gaining that experience such that those guys can lead teams as the years go by, I think that's absolutely critical, and I think that they've read that right. Now, as soon as they get eliminated or as soon as they win the Stanley Cup, from that minute forward, Cheveldayoff's job becomes extremely difficult because of all the reasons that you mentioned, all the contracts that you mentioned, a few less draft picks than you might expect or might think would be ideal for a team that's drafted and developed so well. I think that's just the price that they've paid to be in this situation right now. One of the key things that he'll know that we don't is what the plans are for Jacob Trouba, who, when healthy, when signed, I believe is an excellent 5-on-5 top pairing right-handed defenseman. And at his age, if they could extend him for a long period of time, between him and Bufflin, who are still very impressive players, you've got that top four right side sorted out, and it's still a strength. But if Winnipeg is looking at his RFA contract this year, and he's 1 year from unrestricted free agency, if they know that they're in a tough spot there, then you might see somebody like Jacob Trouba traded at the draft for some of those picks to come back, or perhaps a younger version of the same, or a player that might be able to come in on the right side. I think they're in a very tough position if they're forced to trade him and then pay Myers, and that's your top four solution. Some of those things we don't know at this stage, but I believe Cheveldayoff does. And then it gets into all of that juggling. I think Kevin Hayes was a rental, but if he fits in, they may try, just like in Stastny's case, to fit him in again. And then there's all those other sort of dominoes down the road. His job, I think Kevin Cheveldayoff has done a good job in the last couple of years since I've been covering the team, but it will never be more difficult than the day the season ends this summer.
Sure, and also a name that people didn't think would be a big deal in terms of contract, but potentially could be now, is backup goalie Brossoit. I mean, he's been playing extremely, extremely well for the Jets this season and has been more than capable of stealing a couple of games here and there when the Jets have needed it. And kind of on the flip side, Connor Hellebuyck, who was was one of the best one of the best goaltenders last season. He was absolutely terrific. This season, his numbers have kind of declined a little bit, kind of a strange pattern, at least for this season. He's been playing well in stints, but maybe you can add a little bit to this. And at least in some chunks of the season, he hasn't been playing as well as perhaps he was last season. And I don't know if that is cause for concern for Jets fans, or what about Connor Hellebuyck's play is kind of suggesting that this is a short-term bump in the road and then a longer-term, okay, last season was a fluke, this is who he really is kind of deal.
Well, in Hellebuyck's case, I think there's good arguments in both directions. So a lot of Jets fans will be a bit sour on him right now because his season started quite poorly, and I think starts of seasons tend to stick longer in our memories for sure. And then that up and down play that you're describing has been absolutely real. That's a thing that we've seen from Connor Hellebuyck this season. His numbers overall are ever so slightly above average, and I think that should be good enough for the Winnipeg Jets team. But his contract indicates a guy in the top 10 of the NHL, and he hasn't been that. The interesting thing about goaltenders is just how difficult they are to project going forward. And I think Winnipeg's in a good position to be paying him and Laurent Brossoit a relatively low total between the two of them. But like you point out, Brossoit has been amazing in his small role, and Hellebuyck struggled a little bit, or has been very, very, very average in his, despite getting paid quite a bit more. So in terms of trying to project these guys going forward, it's a bit of a difficult job. You can look at Connor Hellebuyck and his development path and say that he's excelled at every single level, at every single age relative to the league that he's played in. He's always had exceptional numbers as a starter until the season before last, where he struggled, and then last season he was excellent. So you can say the track record's almost been universally good, or you can say that last season was his only exceptional year as an NHL starter, and sort of discount the rest and point at a guy who did it 1 year and got paid for a whole lot of them. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. I think he's a very good goaltender who will have some ups and downs, and I think that's a realistic situation for goalies in the NHL. The trick, as Winnipeg was able to pull off this year, was to not overpay the backup such that your goaltending budget stays overall affordable, that you can weather the ups and downs. And I think over the course of Hellebuyck's contract, we're going to see exceptionally good years and we're going to see average years, and it will be about his ability to make those exceptional years the majority for sure, and sort of live up to what he's been offered. And if that's something of a non-answer, it's because goaltending is so chaotic and it's not nearly, as predictive season over season, month over month as other aspects of hockey can be.
Sure. I mean, goaltending is never an easy thing to predict what's going to happen. I mean, a week from now, let alone what's going to happen a year from now. Quick question for goaltending then. You have two goalies that are both 23 years old in Ken Appleby and Eric Comrie. Both are RFAs at the end of the season. What's the plan with them? I mean, I would assume that at least one of them at this point has to be, at the very least, very, very close to NHL ready. And you have two RFAs in them. You have Brossois an RFA and Connor Hellebuyck, who's signed long term until 2024. I would have to assume that at least one of them will be moved at the draft. Is that a good assumption to make, or is there a plan up Cheveldayoff's sleeve that perhaps I'm not thinking of?
Well, I think that's a good read to make, and I'm under the impression that teams were asking specifically about Eric Comrie in and around the trade deadline. So I think that whatever Cheveldayoff's plans exactly are, I think other teams have recognized this sort of logjam kind of deeper down the Winnipeg Jets goaltending chart and are starting to poke in and around who might be available and sort of get a read on what they might be able to take off of the organization. And then even amongst the names you've listed, I think the guy with the highest ceiling is the newcomer on the block, Mikhail Berdin, who has played really quite terrifically and has quite a lot of, if you watch highlights of the guy, some of the puck handling things that he pulls off are very brazen, to say the least. Geeking in around forecheckers, just off to the side of his net. In his past career prior to this season, he's scored goals into empty nets as well. And there's a lot of fun in and around that player, but also his numbers have been quite exceptional as well. So of all the guys that you've named, I think he's got the highest ceiling long term, but the baby steps approach to that would be for him to carve out more minutes as an AHL starter. So what exactly shakes out of that? I'm not sure. I could see somebody like Eric Comrie being moved at the draft, but then all of a sudden, after all this development time that the Jets have put into him, this is one of the best seasons that he's ever had, if not the best season that he's ever had. And you might want to stick that out and see where this can go. I think the Jets are in a good spot if they can retain everybody who they have for good prices. But if they have to squeeze somebody out, he might be a good sell high candidate just because of how exceptional this year has been for him relative, I think, to his recent history as well.
So the Winnipeg Jets at 84 points, currently on top of the Central Division. If the playoffs started today, they would play the Dallas Stars in round one of the playoffs. Is that the best matchup for this team? Is that the best way for them to enter the playoffs? Or if they had a choice, which, I mean, obviously they don't, but if they were to choose a team of these few that are currently battling for a playoff spot, Dallas, Arizona, Minnesota, Colorado, Chicago, these teams, which of these would Winnipeg want to play the most? Where do they match up the best?
I think it's really compelling about the Western Conference, or what's really compelling about the Western Conference this season is that for all the talk of its front runners, a lot of folks would have talked about Winnipeg and Nashville to start the season, and especially San Jose with the acquisition of Erik Karlsson. And then could Vegas repeat their excellence? I think they've been very good this year as well. And all of a sudden, Calgary is dominant. I mean, there's this group of teams that we perceive to be the top, but I think the whole conference is deep, and a lot of those lower teams could make some noise as well. I sincerely don't think that Winnipeg's success or failure in the first round is going to have a whole lot to do, or as much to do with their opposition as its own ability to figure out 5-on-5 play, to unite the fact that the forwards over the most recent stretch are playing some of the best defense they've played all season long and are playing a little bit better two-way games with ideally a healthy defense core as well. And I think that's the story that I'm watching most for the Jets as they enter the playoffs. Can these two aspects of the game essentially be good at the same time? And I'm not sure that we've completely seen that yet at any point from the Jets this season. And like I said at the top, I think a lot of their wins have to do with superlative special teams and stretches. Some amazing games by Laurent Brossois and Connor Hellebuyck, for all of his up and down play, stolen some as well. I think that for the Jets, it's going to be about uniting all of those aspects, or at least most of them at one time for the first time this season. And if they can do that, I think that they should be able to handle whoever their first round opponent is. It's where those struggles come into play that teams even like Minnesota have run undefeated against the Jets this season, because they've been able to sort of grind them out at 5-on-5 and keep them from getting to danger spots on the ice. And so, I mean, that sounds sometimes like one of the cliches you get from the players, we'll just take care of our game sort of stuff. But I really sincerely believe that for the Jets as they start the playoffs.
For sure, it's a fair point. This brings me to my poll question for this week. How do you think the Winnipeg Jets will do in the postseason? Now, I can only make 4 options, and there was one reply that at Oiler Armchair GM, so already better than McClellan. Peter Chiarelli, excuse me, already better than Peter Chiarelli. Where's the option for getting knocked out first round? Because that's what will happen. Clearly an Oilers fan that does not like the Winnipeg Jets. Now, also, I only had 4 options, so I could not put that even if I wanted to. The 4 options that I chose were I assumed that the Jets would win their first round matchup. And the 4 choices that I put down were make the second round, make the Western Conference final, make the Cup final, or win it all, win the Stanley Cup. Now, I'm going to list off how people voted, but before I do that, I want your opinion as to where you think the Jets will end up.
So I'm going to rewind all the way to this time last year when I was asked these sorts of same questions. And I called the second round a coin flip. I was sure they were going to play Nashville. I was sure it was going to be a long series. And that was my over-under. I couldn't make up my mind whether the Winnipeg Jets could beat Nashville at that point in that 7th game. I said, flip a coin, go for it. Heading into these playoffs, I don't think Winnipeg's nearly as good relative to the West as they were a year ago. And that's where it gets interesting. So I'm not as low on them as the Oilers Armchair GM would be. I do think, based on what I've been able to see in terms of their commitment to two-way play and a little bit better in terms of their systems with forechecking and things like that, I see the potential for an uptick in their 5-on-5 play, which has really been their Achilles heel all year. I see potential for that uptick, and if Morrissey and Byfuglien come back with some health to them, I think that they are a very good team once again. I see them going past that first round. Even with all that said, I think they're going to need to improve even more than maybe I've seen in recent times, or they'll have to play even better than they have at any stretch of this season if they're going to get past that second round, is my opinion. So I'm going to say that if I have to pick one right now, they're going to the second round for sure, but they might not get out of it. Okay.
So this was one of the tightest polls I've ever had. This got around 80 votes, and make the second round got 39% of the vote. Make the Western Conference final got 40% of the vote. So people are as split as you are. People can't seem to decide whether the Jets are going to get out of the second round or higher. So this is a very heated debate in the poll right now. Make the Cup final received 19% of the vote, and one Jets fan or whoever fan they are, one person chose to win the Stanley Cup. So this person is very optimistic about the Winnipeg Jets winning the Cup this season, which is fair. This is a solid team. And also, to your point about playing the Predators, I am not high on Pekka Rinne. I've said this multiple times before on the show. Pekka Rinne could win all 82 games in the regular season for all I care, as he's almost done in Nashville the last few years. He's been very dominant during the regular season, and then come playoff time, he got pulled. I think it was 3 times in the series against Winnipeg last season. This is a goaltender that, come crunch time, come situations where he needs to stop pucks, hasn't really done that in a lot of situations. And I feel like if you played Nashville again, even though, like you said, the Jets could potentially be a little worse than they were last year, I feel like the same result could happen. I feel like Winnipeg could keep chasing Rinne and could win the series. I mean, is that super far off, or am I right, do you think?
I think you're definitely onto something for sure. And like to be clear as well, I perceive the NHL this season as Tampa Bay and then a whole bunch of other teams.
Oh, sure, absolutely. The Lightning are worlds ahead of everyone else in the standings right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of a lot of the underlying metrics and things like that too, I think that they're simply top to bottom built that well. And then once you get into the West, where I really do think it's wide open, I think it might not sound like it because I'm talking about them getting eliminated in the second round, but I believe Winnipeg's a good team, and I believe that Nashville's a good team, and I believe San Jose and Vegas, et cetera, all throughout the line. I think that that the margins between these guys are not very big, and that it's a situation where any one of those good teams, or even one of the upstarts that are fighting to squeak in, could take the Western Conference crown this year, and I think that's realistic as well. So my over-under is kind of set at that second round. I'm not really too sure about it right now. I really need to see Winnipeg do the things that it's known for when it comes to dominating games at 5-on-5, or at least carrying them at 5-on-5, before I'm particularly bullish on this year's playoffs. But that said, I do believe things are so wide open that, that they are in that group of teams that could go deep. So I think, I wouldn't disagree with the word you said, and certainly reputations get made at the playoffs for better or for worse. And right now, Rene's got that game 7 at the very least, and maybe a little bit more hanging over him.
Yeah, Rene. If Rene wants to change your opinions, maybe stop the puck. That's if he wants to change the opinion of someone like me, play better in the playoffs, and then our opinions will change. That's all I'm saying. Another reply that I want to highlight here is by JD Killo at JD _media monster. He said, in a Western Conference that lacks offensive juggernauts other than Calgary, Winnipeg can play a game where they can just simply outscore opponents, but without giving up that much on their end. Still, I don't see them winning the Western Conference final. And also, a special shout out to Owen Cienko at O Cienko, who replied, "Is Yotes in 7 an option?" And special shout out to the Arizona Coyotes that are currently in a playoff spot for the first time this season, which is outstanding. So what do you think about what JD said? That he likes the Winnipeg's offense, that the offense can dominate games at times, but the Jets probably won't win the Western Conference final if they make it that far.
I think that's very fair. I think that the Jets, top 12 and even more so forwards are superlatively good. You've got Matthieu Perreault, Andrew Kopp, and Jack Roslovic on the fourth line generating offense and outscoring teams right now. And then it gets better from there every step up that you take. I think that's realistic. I think that high-speed teams with a lot of aggressive back pressure have really exposed the Jets, and Calgary has been one of them. I also think that the analytics will show you that it's been easier for most teams to create quality chances against the Jets this season than last. So there's some vulnerabilities there, to be sure. If Calgary and Winnipeg met in the conference final, for example, I think it would be reasonable to think that Calgary would be the favorite in that situation because of that speed game and the way that it matches up against the Jets. And that's part of why I want to see such aggressive back pressure and a stronger forecheck at the same time as good D in Winnipeg's situation, because I think that's exactly right. They can push some teams out and around, but they're going to give up quality, and teams like that, like a Calgary, or even like playing the prototypical Vegas hockey of last season's playoffs as well, or of last year's playoffs, that gives the Jets fits, and it has all season long, and I think that they're vulnerable, and I think that's very fair to say.
So what exactly is the benchmark for success for the Winnipeg Jets in the playoffs this season, and what would be considered failure? Is it cup or bust? Is it, hey, let's make it to at least where we were before, and then that's not a failure? Where is that line exactly?
I think that I almost have two different answers for it. I think that if I were in the situation, if I were a player in that situation, nothing less than winning more games during this year's playoffs than last would be satisfying. And I'm not willing to commit to cup or bust just because of how deep the NHL is this year and how good Tampa Bay would be specifically if they got that far. But I don't think any human being can look at the benchmark that they set a year ago and think that anything less than that would be acceptable. So for the Winnipeg Jets, I think the benchmark is winning more than one game in the Western Conference Finals and ideally making it to the Stanley Cup Finals. I think satisfaction would be at least the Stanley Cup Finals, however that went down. I think that if you're going to go into an analysis or analytics point of view, I don't think that they're heavily favored to go as far as that. So from my perspective, should the Jets make it to the Western Conference Finals, I'll say that they overcame some of what had troubled them during the regular season, because they've yet to show us that they're that juggernaut who absolutely should go all the way. So if you want to be a human being, at least the Stanley Cup Finals. If you want to be a robot, just something that outperforms what we've seen so far.
Sure, sure, absolutely. I think that's a perfect way to put it. And for the let's say the playoffs are over now, it's draft day and beyond. And as we said earlier, the Jets don't really have a whole lot of draft picks this year. They have a second round pick, a fourth and a fifth, and that's about it. As of now, obviously, time will tell with the contract situation if that will change. But how, in your opinion, is the pipeline looking for the Jets next year, 2, 3, 4 years down the road? Because they have some really great names, like we mentioned earlier with Eric Comrie and the 21-year-old goaltender Mikhail Berdin that we talked about as well, and some other great names that potentially could play for the Jets sooner rather than later, like Christian Vassilainen as well, a big name. But how overall, in your opinion, is the future of the Winnipeg Jets looking like?
Well, I think it's fair to say that they're clearly in the bottom half in terms of the pipeline right now, and maybe in the lower tier. At the same time as saying that that's not maybe as much of a concern as it should be. So you have Christian Vesalainen kind of knocking on the door, and I think next season we'll see him as a Winnipeg Jet. You have some good defensive prospects, specifically Dylan Samberg is a guy I would like to highlight there. And then other than that, it's not the days where you have Kyle Connor and Jack Roslovic boiling over in the AHL, or Nick Ehlers recently drafted, or a lottery win that leads to Patrick Laine taking number 2 overall. It's absolutely not there. And Winnipeg's prospect pipeline, I would say, yeah, definitely in the bottom half of the league right now. And the reason why I'm not as concerned by that as I could be is the fact that they've graduated all of those players that I've just named to the NHL level, and that they're going to be early 20s, in their prime, mid 20s as well, by the time that Winnipeg's draft picks from this season and next catch up to that as well. So I think it's safe to look at the pipeline and say that no, it's not what it's been, and it's a concern that the Jets need to continue to draft well, and they're going to have a tough job because they don't have as many picks. But I think that as the years go by and these young players stay good, and Nick Ehlers learns to drive play even more, and Patrick Laine adds a two-way threat to his game, Mark Scheifele gets more experience, all sorts of things like this. They have enough lead in these guys to buy time for the pipeline to catch up.
One last question here before I let you go. This has been a fantastic conversation. Once again, I super, super, super appreciate taking the time talking some hockey with me. The Winnipeg Jets are very dominant at home. They're 22-9-4, but away from MTS Center, they're 18-16. They're almost 500 away from their home rink. Now, there isn't really much to kind of back this up, obviously, because the team is the same. It's not like they're changing teams away from MTS Center than they play at home. But is there a particular thing that they do differently away from home? Because they don't. I would assume that the game is almost identical to the way they play, either it be away or a home or wherever, and yet they do considerably worse away from Winnipeg than they do at Winnipeg. So is there a particular reason for that, in your opinion? What have you seen that kind of highlights that line between their play at home versus away? Is it the fans? Maybe the fans kind of add that extra layer to the Jets, or was there something else?
Yeah, I love the fans' idea and the fans' argument. I also think that maybe more likely would be that this year's Jets, like I've sort of been saying, have maybe a little bit of a weaker underbelly than last year's did. And before the arrival of Hayes, that Brian Little, Patrick Laine, and at times Kyle Connor line number 2 has been easy to keep in its own zone for long stretches. The top 4, that second pairing of Byfuglien and Sherratt, hasn't been as good as Byfuglien and Enstrom were, even though they have in fact been good. But then with Byfuglien's injury, all of a sudden the Jets have spent a long time this season with one very good top pairing, and then some players playing above their perhaps above their best fit below that. So it may be that the Winnipeg Jets are easier to expose in a matchup sort of capacity this year, and that's what I would look for to try to answer that question. But also, like, sometimes you see interesting things happen just in terms of variation. And if you looked at all games on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays versus Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, you might find disparate records, and it might not mean anything. So I would look at Winnipeg's sort of weaker lines in terms of a matchup capacity and look to see if coaches are exposing them or getting those matchups sorted out when Winnipeg's on the road. And if I couldn't find anything compelling there, I think I would just leave it to random variation, because sometimes stuff happens.
That's a totally fair point. Murat, this has been an excellent conversation. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I mean, the Jets play in 2.5 hours versus Boston, and yet you've taken some time to talk to me about some hockey. Truly, truly appreciate it. Tell people where they can read your stuff, obviously, on The Athletic, and also where they can follow you on social media.
Absolutely. So The Athletic Winnipeg is absolutely the place to find me. And if you want more information about the system stuff and the things that we talked about where the Winnipeg needs to be better to be that juggernaut. Last week, I put up a very long and detailed 2-part series, the problems and the solutions, with insight from the coach, from Blake Wheeler, from the star players, from the really intelligent two-way players like Andrew Kopp and Adam Lowry as well. Basically just diagnosing what the Jets need to do to become that team that I think so many want to see from them and believe that they can be this year. So that's a really good series to get into as a starting point at The Athletic Winnipeg. And if you want to look at Twitter, I'm at WPG Murat, which is WPG MURAT, because I am the only Murat from Winnipeg, and I hold to that.
Oh, man, Murat, thank you again so much. I truly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again real soon.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it myself.
Absolutely. And this was episode number 39 of Chel Squared, episode 40 next week. I'll talk to you then.